Oh, boy.
All right, we're gonna get going. Bruce, are you guys gonna use those two chairs or no?
Probably not.
Okay, that's fine.
There's no need for us to be too far apart. Yeah. She can kick me when I say.
Jackie, you're here right in time. I'm gonna call the meeting to order. Alan, I see you here, thank you very much. First order of business will be a roll call. And Jackie, if you don't mind starting, since you're here.
Jackie Horrigan, designee of Undersecretary John Chapman, Office of Consumer Affairs, Secretary Mike Keneally's designee, Housing and Economic Development.
Pat Chermel, representing the Old Colony Planning Council.
Joe Coughlin, Town of Plymouth Nuclear Matters Committee.
Pine Dubois, Speaker of the House.
John Flores, representing the Governor's Office.
Dave Johnston, representing Secretary Matt Beaton.
Kevin O'Reilly, Town of Plymouth, designee of the Speaker of the House.
Sean Mullen, Town of Plymouth.
John Orenberg, Entergy.
Dave Nichols, appointed by Governor Baker.
Jack Priest, Department of Public Health.
Richard Rothstein, Town of Plymouth appointee.
Rick Sherman, UWUA representative.
John Giuso, standing in for Director Kurt Schwartz, MEMA.
Joe Lynch, Entergy.
Dan Wolf, appointee of the Senate President.
John Mahoney, Town of Plymouth, Board of Selectmen. We have a quorum. As many of you may have received my note this afternoon, I'm not sure whether anyone got it properly. Looks like there was a problem sending out the minutes, which were sent out on December 18th. I got a copy because I put it all in, but what I would recommend we do is just defer the approval and review, and I'm not sure what happened to it. And I apologize, but Alan got it to me on time, and I sent it out the same day, and I'm not sure what happened, so it's just, if nobody's got any concerns about deferring the minutes until the next meeting, that would be fine.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Unanimous. Before we get to our guests for the evening from the NRC, I want to talk a few minutes about the upcoming meetings and preface that by saying there's about 135 days until Entergy has said that it'll stop producing power at Pilgrim. 135 days, about the length of a college semester. So it is not a great deal of time. As a result of that, I'm going to make a recommendation that we've got a few minutes to discuss it, for the upcoming meetings on February 20th, March 20th, April 17th, May 15th, June 19th, and July 19th. I'm being optimistic here. I'd like the focus of those meetings to primarily be, and I'm going to add a couple of other things on each one, but I think we should have the focus on those to do two things at each meeting. To both hear from Holtec and from our friends at Entergy on what progress they have made and where they stand on the individual items and recommendations that the panel has made and that we've received from outside groups. So we will be inviting them for each meeting to spend some time with it, to give us an update, and so that the panel members can ask questions about where we stand on the various things. And the type of topics that I'm talking about, say, for example, with Holtec on the agreement to go from 25 millirems down to 10 millirems. It's that kind of topic. I think we've been fairly clear in terms of what we're recommending, and I think it's time now that we shift gears a little bit for the next 4 or 5, 6 months to focusing on what kinds of topics, what kinds of issues, what kind of agreements do we want to reach between the Commonwealth and Entergy and Holtec. Any discussion on that? I was expecting some from you, Joe, but if you have
That sounds fine. Obviously, we're heading towards decommissioning. I think it's appropriate to give the panel updates on where we stand with the key issues, and we'd be more than happy to do that on a regular basis.
And let me ask you, Joe, do you want me to communicate directly with Holtec, or would you prefer to still be the conduit for a lot of it?
I'd prefer if I can be the conduit, and I'll be more than happy to coordinate things with them.
Okay. Any other comments? Yes, Joe.
I think it's a good idea, Mr. Chairman. I would certainly support it. There's a lot going on between the different groups, not only the Entergy and Holtec, but the town, the IWG, the panel, and it's, I think, a really good idea that everything be coordinated so we all know what's going on in all of these discussions.
And that's really the design behind it. I'm going to speak to that in a minute about all of the other activities that are going on, but Pine?
I think there were some leftover items from last year that we had asked for that we had never gotten,
Yep.
like the historic site assessment, that
Yep.
sort of stuff. And I'll talk more later tonight about the, the flooding and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So if we could get those kinds of real updates, that would be appreciated.
That would be very helpful. Any other comments on the agenda for the next? So that's what they'll look like, but I'm going to add some other topics. So for example, in February, I'm going to put a section on for administrative and annual report. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. I don't think we have the time to spend on it, but I do think we need to discuss how we're going to organize ourselves for our next annual report in June. We're about halfway into the year. We haven't had an opportunity, I don't believe, for anyone to have any of the working group meetings. I think we've got to take some time, once we get beyond this meeting, to really figure out what do we want to do for a report. Maybe we just want to update from where we were last year, but I'd like to put that on the agenda for February. I'm also going to add on 2 new standard items. One will be for any new business at the end of the meeting, and also at the beginning of the meeting if there's any old business. And Pine, to your point, that's exactly where I see these kind of outstanding to-do list items should be, so that we go right back to it at the following meeting. Any comments on that approach or those suggestions? Okay. Hearing none, then let me give you a little update on the point you just mentioned, Joe. The panel, of course, did not meet in December. We couldn't get this room, and we couldn't get another suitable location. And we hadn't planned on meeting in December. But I want to give you personally an update on a lot of the activities that have been going on among the other organizations and individuals, so that you have a much broader sense. We're delighted to have the chairman of the Plymouth City, Town of Plymouth, rather, Board of Selectmen here tonight, in addition to John Mahoney. Let me just assure you that the Town of Plymouth has been terrifically and actively engaged, if be it quietly engaged. They have been speaking with Entergy, and they have been speaking with the delegation, the complete bipartisan delegation. They've been speaking with members of the interagency working group. They've been speaking with the Attorney General's office. Everybody has been talking. A lot of these meetings, because they are not public meetings, they're private discussions and negotiations from individual perspectives, cannot be shared in this forum, and shouldn't be. I fully respect our good friends from Entergy and Holtec. They didn't really have public meetings to discuss as they were putting this agreement together, and that was appropriate for them, and we have to do the same. Because, in fact, we are now down to the point of negotiating agreements on the issues that are important. I have personally spoken at length with the Attorney General's office, and for those of you who attended last evening's meeting with Bruce and the team from the NRC, the Attorney General's office, Seth Schofield, made an excellent presentation, and he was very clear in saying that the Attorney General of the Commonwealth plans on intervening in this matter when the 20-day period is announced for the hearing. Let me just tell you exactly what that means. They will submit a formal letter to the NRC intervening in the process at the hearing. Others may decide to do it as well, but one of the things that I can assure you of, and I'm going to give you an exact quote, is that the Attorney General's office is working extremely closely with the interagency working group and the administration, and will be representing the Commonwealth and us in any and all negotiations and agreements to secure the terms and conditions which will be most favorable to the Commonwealth and to the communities involved. That is exactly what they're doing. They have copies, and they have gone through in detail everything from the unanimously approved and adopted Board of Selectmen's list of what they would like to see. They have our annual report. They've gone through each of the recommendations. I personally have gone through them with them. They are looking forward to hearing a lot of the things that never made the final draft. They would like very much to see those items that we did not include in the first annual report, but that sort of found their way to the cutting floor rather than into the document. So with that, I would request you do a couple of things. One is over the next week or so, if you could, if any of you have topics that you want to make sure gets into the mix with not only the delegation as it's crafting and filing legislation. The delegation, as you know, is completely bipartisan with every single member of the delegation, from the Outer Cape to the south of Boston, Republican, Democrat alike, are all on board to do the same legislation. If there is anything that you would like more to be advanced on this, I need to know to act as one conduit. The same is true if there is any additional topics or priorities. One of the difficult challenges for the Attorney General's office, as well as the Secretary of Environmental Affairs and the working group, is to prioritize what topics they are going to be working with Entergy and Holtec on. So if you have any, please submit them to me. I know I sent out an email asking for something similar. Are there any comments or thoughts on this at this point? Dave? Oh.
I'll defer to John first.
Okay. I
Go ahead.
saw the arm cover, didn't recognize the shirt.
No, Mr. Chairman, just a quick, couple of quick comments. You introduced the chairman of the Plymouth Board of Selectmen, Kenneth Tavares, but we have a third member out in the audience, and that's Select Person Sheila Joyce. I wanted to identify her. Oh, I'm sorry, and Tony Provenzano's there. I didn't see him behind the podium, so there's four of us
Didn't
here.
see both of you. Thank
And
you.
then the quick little update I had was respect to last night's Selectmen's meeting. We unanimously sponsored an article for spring town meeting, which I believe is the first Saturday of April. 2-year pilot extension, fiscal year 20 and 21. Fiscal year 20 would be $7 million payment. Fiscal year 21 would be a $6.5 million payment. So that's a combined $13.5 million. The initial 2 years after this plant ceases to make electricity and sell that into the New England grid. So I just wanted to thank Entergy for those negotiations and for Joe for being the point man on that.
David?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just want to kind of reinforce what you said about making sure that the committee hears from the neighboring communities. I mean, to the extent that this is a conduit between the government and the local communities, obviously the town of Plymouth is very engaged. I think it's important that we kind of reinforce the need to understand if there are other priorities we haven't heard from other communities that might be affected by the shutdown of the plant, that we be able to receive some of that input and digest it as a committee and make sure that it's part of the discussion with the state as well. So I appreciate you expressing interest in making sure we haven't missed anything. It seems to me that now is the time to do that in the next 30 days. And so, to the extent that we're communicating with the public, I'm glad we're reinforcing that need for comment.
Thank you, Dave. Any other comments? Then let me just close with this. Back last year in the summer, when we adopted and approved the first annual report, we did so with the unanimous approval of all 21 of us. We're in a unique position right now because everyone, from the Baker administration to the Attorney General's office to the complete bipartisan delegation to our entire federal delegation, both U.S. senators, congressmen, and the panel, as well as the Board of Selectmen in the respective towns, we are all on exactly the same page. What we need to do over the next couple of weeks is make sure we're speaking with one voice to Entergy and to Holtec to make sure that we're clear about what we feel is a fair, safe, and reasonable approach to the agreements that have to be made. So that's what we'll be doing. Any final comments before I turn? All right. So the good news, guys, yes, Joe.
I have a question for John. John, on those new pilot agreements, are those, Entergy would agree the moment since they're the licensee. Has Holtec also indicated that they will agree to that if and when they take over the license?
Yeah, from what we're being told, and I don't know if Joe wants to jump in here, but the negotiations are they're going to honor whatever agreement we sign, pending town meeting approval in 3 months.
Any other comments? Well, with that, we're a few minutes. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, Senator?
Given that the plant will no longer be generating revenue, I'm just curious as to whether the pilot payments are coming out of the trust money.
I don't know the answer, but I think that's a very legitimate question.
I'll be more than happy to take that question back and provide an answer to the panel.
Thank you. Appreciate you. Mr. Toomey, would you like a chair up here, or? Okay, I thought you might be. I just wanted to extend the courtesy. With that, I'd like to welcome our guests and thank you very much for attending. I know you've had a very busy schedule since you arrived in Boston. You've met with a lot of people, and we do appreciate all of the input. Bruce Watson and Amy Schneider are here. They have a presentation prepared for us, and then we have a nice period of time for all the panel to ask questions and to have a discussion, get some clarification about things. And then there'll be a 30-minute public comment period, and I think Bruce and Amy, you'll enjoy the way we do it. We do a little differently than the NRC, but we'll save that for a surprise for you. So with that.
Well, Mr. Mullen, thanks for inviting us to be
Sean.
here. Oh, Sean, okay, yeah. Thanks for inviting us to be here. As you said, this is a fourth leg of a marathon of meetings, and actually, I'm very happy to be, on behalf of the NRC, to be here and provide information that we hope will be helpful to the state and the local community. My name is Bruce Watson. I'm Chief of the Reactor Decommissioning Branch, and I'm in the Division of Decommissioning, Uranium Recovery, and Waste Programs. And as Sean noted, Amy Snyder is here with me. She will be the project manager when the plant shuts down, permanently defuels, and this plant is transferred to my branch, and Amy will be the project manager responsible for the licensing activities. Also with us tonight from the NRC are Ray Powell. He's behind me here. He's the branch chief for the inspection program from Region 1. His group does the decommissioning inspections and the dry fuel storage inspections. Also is Will Smith. He's a security specialist in our Office of Nuclear Security and Incident Response. And finally, behind me also is Bo Pham. He's my new deputy division director, and so he's here to help me and also hopefully learn about the Pilgrim situation also from all the meetings. With that, I'll go ahead with my presentation. I hate to say, but a lot of it is going to be a repeat from the last few days. If you've been there, you've probably heard some of this or all of it. And but I felt that I wasn't sure who would be at the meeting last night, so I wanted to make sure that everyone heard the same information. So we're going to be talking about the Pilgrim post-shutdown decommissioning reports, and of course the license transfer process. First of all, I want to remind everybody that the NRC is an independent safety regulator. We regulate safety. We do not regulate the commerce and the energy market in the state or the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That's a responsibility of the state. So I want to highlight that our mission is to protect the public health and safety, promote the common defense and security, and protect the environment. And our current work is related to regulatory requirements during the decommissioning of power reactors. NRC has many years of decommissioning experience. Our current regulations have been in place for 21 years. We have completed the decommissioning license terminations for over 80 complex material sites, and that would include 10 nuclear power plants. And all these sites have been released for unrestricted use, so the owner can decide what to use with the land after the decommissioning is completed and all the radioactive materials removed. With the exception of the 7 of the 10 power plants, they still have dry fuel storage facilities on them, and of course that's the responsibility of the federal government to take care of the disposal of the fuel. Next slide, please. I thought it would be good to kind of review some of the steps that would go into the decommissioning. Typically the site is prepared for decommissioning, which takes anywhere from 1 to 2 years. And during this time, they will remove the radioactive waste that's stored on site, remove filters, resins, radioactive materials, and drain systems to allow the plant to be prepared for decommissioning. In many cases, they will de-energize the plant, or systems in the plant, and go to construction power, so no one reduces the hazards for electrical accidents. During this time, the licensee will also characterize the site to determine what the radiological characterization of the plant is. They already have a good idea of that from operating it for all those years. But they will also make other preparations, such as hiring specialty contractors that will do some of the work during the decommissioning. After the decommissioning preparation period, the licensee can either go into decon or safe store. Decon is, of course, the place where the plant goes into a prompt, immediate decommissioning. And so they will begin the decommissioning process, dismantling and manage the fuel fairly quickly in the process. They can also go to a safe store condition, which the plant is placed in a safe, stable condition and maintained in a state that basically is, I would call it a mothballed state. And so the plant is already prepared for decommissioning at a later date, and so the the NRC allows up to 60 years to complete the decommissioning. So during those typical first 50 years, the radiation dose rates in the plant will be reduced significantly, down around 1% of what they were when the plant shut down. So right now we have 6 plants in active decommissioning, or decon. 4 of those will be terminating the license, and hopefully the end of this year, beginning of 2020. So there will be a total of 14 plants that have completed the process. We also have 15 plants in safe store, and so we continue to inspect those at least on an annual basis to make sure they're maintained in a safe condition. The level of inspection will go up and down with the activities that are at the site. Next slide, please. I thought I'd say a few words about the license transfer application. The letters received on November 16th, Entergy and Holtec submitted license transfer application for Pilgrim. I also put up the Adams numbers from our public website, where you can actually get copies of those documents. If you go to our public website and go to the Adams document system, you can type in those numbers and the document should come up. They're all publicly available. So both Entergy and Holtec jointly submitted a license transfer application. The proposed Holtec PSDR is a supplement to the license transfer document. We are currently reviewing the Entergy PSDR, which has them going to a safe store condition, and will plan to complete decommissioning by 2079. The Holtec PSDR states that they're going to complete the decommissioning by 2024. And so that review will actually begin after we complete the Entergy one. We basically have the same people, same financial people looking at both documents. Of course, the Holtec license transfer is contingent upon approval of the license transfer and closure of the sale. So it's meaningless unless the sale and we agree that the NRC approves the license transfer. So we are taking comments on both since they are both publicly available. Next slide, please. So the application process, review process, we have an internal procedure, licensing 107, and it's called Procedures for Handling License Transfers. We've used this many times. License transfers are very common in the industry. This is unique in that it is a sale. The most recent one that's been on the records is the Vermont sale, and that transfer was approved, and the sale was completed last Friday, and we issued the conforming license amendment that made North Star the owner. So we have one that we've done the whole process through for both the license transfer and the sale. The areas that we look at as part of our review, the financial qualifications, obviously, of the proposed new licensee, the decommissioning funding assurance, if there's any review of that company for foreign ownership, control, or domination. We look at their technical qualifications, and of course we look at the insurance indemnity. If approved, an order will be issued to both Entergy, I believe it is, and that we are approving the transfer. They will inform Holtec, and then there will be a conforming license amendment issued when the sale is closed. So when the closure of the sale is complete, we will issue the amendment to complete the license transfer. So license transfer reviews typically take around a year to complete. The staff is also looking at a license transfer and sale agreement for the Oyster Creek plant. That's already underway. So, and also Holtec is the purchaser of that particular facility. We are going to try to, from NRR, our folks at NRR, John Lamb was at the meeting last night. He's the project manager currently for Pilgrim. His group is handling the license transfer for Pilgrim, and they're working hard to try and meet the one-year deadline in advance of that. Next slide, please. Just a reminder of what the post-shutdown activities report contains. It contains a planned description of the decommissioning activities. It's a high-level schedule of those planned decommissioning activities. It contains the site-specific cost estimate for the decommissioning, and it also contains an environmental review of the current environmental impact statement, so that the licensee can affirm or advise the NRC that there are other issues in the environmental review that need to be reviewed again. So it's really an affirmation of the current environmental impact statement or environmental assessment for the site. So as right, we have both the PSDRs, just to show you a copy of them. On the slide also is the ML numbers, where you can get a copy of those PSDRs if you, from Adams, if you so choose to look at those. Next slide, please. So the PSDR review process, we use Regulatory Guide 1.185, and the Adams number here is also when reviewing the PSDR. Basically, there's certain content requirements that we want in that PSDR in a level of detail so the staff can obtain an understanding of what the plans are and the schedule. It also serves primarily as a means for the NRC to gauge our resources and plan our resources to support our oversight of the decommissioning activities. It is also a vehicle that informs the public and the stakeholders in the state of what the planned activities are. We conduct a review of the environmental part using New Reg 0586, which is the generic environmental impact statement for decommissioning of nuclear facilities, and New Reg 1437, which is the generic impact statement for license renewal of plants regarding the Pilgrim station. So, our review, we will ensure that the content is in the decommissioning, post-shutdown decommissioning activities report. I want to remind everybody that it is a report. It is not a licensing action or a federal action. So therefore, it is not approved. We will send them a letter of acceptance when if and when we complete our review and feel it's acceptable. And if not, we will address any shortcomings in the PSDRs by request for additional information. So next slide, please. Our PSDR requires a public meeting, which we held last night. We obtained some very good information from the public and from a number of you on the panel. And we thought that was a very good forum last night. Part of the other issues that we have, also we allowed comments on the license transfer and the proposed PSDR from Holtec. You can get the information here on the rulemaking from these websites. Right now, all comments on the Entergy PSDR are due by March 21st, 2019. Unfortunately, with the federal government partially being shut down, we have not been able to publish the Federal Register notice for the license transfer, but we expect that to be done soon. The good news is you have more time to look at it since it's publicly available. The bad news is we haven't got it out as quickly as we wanted to, but there will be a 30-day comment period and a 20-day opportunity for hearing, which I understand is very important to the state of Massachusetts. So with that, I'll go to the last slide. I think it is, next to the last slide. And just as a reminder, comments on the PSDR and the license transfer may also be mailed to this address at our NRC headquarters, and they will be collected We will review them and provide a summary of the comments that we receive. And we take the comments very seriously. So just like last night, we took the comments very seriously, and there will be a meeting summary from that on those comments also. With that, like to go to your questions.
Yep. Let me, first, before we open up to questions, I just have a personal note. It has been a pleasure working with Amy over the last couple of months, putting all of this together, so I want to say how professional, how much of a pleasure it was to work with you, really do. You're a great asset for the NRC. So with that, let's open it up to questions. Any members have questions? Right, Jack, you're first.
Thanks for joining us tonight, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Jack Priest. I'm with the Department of Public Health. I had some feedback at last night's meeting concerning the timeline on this. Jack Priest with the Department of Public Health. So I had some questions from a couple of members of the audience that participated last night regarding the timeline on the PSDAR review and submittal. So when does the 12-month clock start?
The 12-month clock started when we received those. It was docketed, and we've done our initial review, and we should have sent out hopefully an acceptance letter saying we were going to conduct a detailed review, and we feel that the information is adequate.
Yes, and we did send that letter out. The NRC sent that letter out on December 17th. The ML number is ML18333A167, and it explains that the staff accepted the submittal for review. And in that letter, it also says, based on the information provided, it estimates the amount of time that it would take to complete.
And what was that estimate?
The letter says the NRC expects the staff to complete its review in approximately 12 months, which is December 2019.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to try and, from what I understand from NR, they're going to be working as fast as they can to get that completed sooner, but we have no guarantees of that.
So for Vermont Yankees LTA review, what was the length of time between the LTA submittal and the conforming letter?
I think it was about a year and a half. The staff had lots of questions. In the record, you're going to see multiple sets of requests for additional information. And so they were mainly on the financial issues. And eventually, I think those were resolved through discussions with Entergy and I think North Star. And so, yeah, it took a little longer than that because we had issues with the application primarily from the financial side. I know we also had some technical questions on the qualifications.
So is it fair to say that 12 months would be the best estimate, but more realistically with a complicated transfer with Holtec and being an LLC, that duration would be closer to Vermont's review time period?
I can't say that they're going to be comparable. In general, it's generally going to take us about a year to do a license transfer. I don't think the Holtec being an LLC is going to be any different than any other company. I realize it's a slight difference in corporate structure, but I don't see that being a major reason for I guess, increasing the review time unless there's additional questions that we might have from our review of the application.
In addition, thank you. In addition, there was another letter for the license transfer, and it also says 12 months, December 2019. But it also says the NRC staff will endeavor to complete its review in 7 months, which is approximately July 2019 for license transfer application, which includes the supplement PSDR, the Holtec PSDR. And remember, that's contingent upon acceptance of the license transfer and closure sale of the closure sale equity.
Is there a change in the process that the NRC is going to use to do that review, to
No.
go from 18 months to 7 months?
No, it's, I would call it more of a matter of resources. It's going to be the same people that are doing the financial reviews for other license transfer, including the Oyster Creek one, which they're working on right now. They're also reviewing the Entergy PSDR, the financial part of that. So I would consider them the critical path on that. Like I said, also there, in the PSDR, there's also a review of the environmental assessment. That also takes some time to ensure it gets completed. So I would say it's more of a question of the staff resources availability, and principally it's going to be our financial reviewers.
Thank you.
Kevin?
Hi, Kevin O'Reilly from Plymouth. Thanks again for coming. As Sean mentioned, I know it's probably been a long week for you, so we appreciate you both being here. In your slide and in your comments, you've mentioned a couple of times financial review and financial qualifications. For those of us who are unfamiliar with that, could you maybe give us a little primer in terms of the things that you'll be looking at? And specifically, I get to the comments of the Attorney General last night about ability to pay if there's not enough money in the trust fund. I was wondering if you might be able to address that issue.
I can try. From a financial standpoint, the reviewers look at the amount that's in the fund. Our standard is there a reasonable assurance that they have sufficient funds to complete the radiological decommissioning? And so they will review the amount of funding that's in the fund, along with the spent fuel management plan, and they have their own criteria they use for making that determination. Included in the PSDRs is also a detailed expenditure rate for the money that is currently in the fund. So it's up to them to make that assessment and make that determination that the funds are adequate to safely perform the decommissioning.
To completion.
Yeah, to completion, to license termination. Secondly, they will be doing they are doing a review of the Holtec International and the subsidiary they formed for financial strength in order to be a licensee and actually possess both the plant and the nuclear fuel. So.
And do you look at past performance or
well, in this case, I don't think
Right,
Holtec's
because
done
there
much
is no past
decommission-
performance, right.
We had the same issue with the North Star. They had very limited decommissioning experience. But I can say that Holtec is an experienced nuclear company in the management of spent fuel. I mean, it's pretty obvious what their core business line is. So.
And in terms of the LLCs that are formed underneath Holtec, how much weight is given to the fact that these are the new companies?
I really can't answer that question. I don't think that sorry.
At the Hearing Loss Association meeting, they said if we aren't proactive, he's just mumbling, I don't hear anything.
Thank you.
Okay.
I bet
Thank you.
half the people in here.
Thank you.
Sorry, if it had been brought to my attention, I would have been talking here right away. I think the first question, I really can't answer your question because I'm not a financial reviewer.
Okay.
But I know that they're looking at the whole aspect of the qualifications of the company to take over the license, and that's a key critical issue to the NRC, that they will be able to financially do the decommissioning and do it safely. So.
Thank you.
Let me just follow up on a few, and then I'll open it up for more. Correct me where I might go off the path here factually. So Holtec is creating Holtec CDI for the purpose of this decommissioning. And from what Holtec representatives have told us, Bruce, they plan this as a significant new business for themselves over the next decades. It's going to be a big investment. So this LLC that's being created, that to my knowledge doesn't even exist today, has no assets, it has no track record, It is reliant solely on the 1.05 billion as of October 31st to fund the decommissioning effort. Any of that inaccurate so far that we know of?
They also, if the transfer of the license is approved, my also understanding is they'll own all the land around the plant. They'll also have the assets of the plant. They will have the assets for the reimbursements for the management of the spent fuel from the Department of Energy.
Yeah.
So there's additional things that get formulated into
And
that.
and if the exemptions are approved, et cetera. But whatever that block of money is, those will be the only assets that at the time, so as you make the decision, are you making the decision based on the financial capabilities of Holtec CDI, or are you making on the basis of Holtec?
I'm going to have to defer that to the financial people, but I would assume it's all the company,
The licensee.
yeah, the licensee, which will be the
Holtec.
Holtec LLC, right?
Okay.
Okay. I mean,
Holtec Pilgrim.
yeah, Holtec Pilgrim, excuse me, I guess operated by CDI.
Okay.
So- Well, I'm
Let's keep the audience, unless you're with the NRC, let's keep the comments to yourself till you get up. So, not to belabor it or dig too deep for the purpose of the night, we will get you some written questions, because I know it's very difficult on the
Okay.
spot. That's one other thing for all the panel members. If you do have specific questions, you can send them, if you'd like, directly to Bruce or to Amy, or if you want to route them through me, I will do my best to get them. Probably best to CC both to make sure. But I think written questions are better. So let me ask you a couple of quick ones, and then I'll open it up for more. One of the small things, and the disclosure on this was sort of surprising. We asked, for example, what the warranty period was, or will be, on the dry cask storage. Holtec representatives told us, sitting right where you are, Bruce, that they would not tell us that because that was proprietary information between them and Entergy. So if Entergy on one hand is saying, well, if this doesn't really work out, we'll have to go to Safe Store, and that'll be 60 years, and we don't even know what the warranty period is on the cask. Can you tell us that? Will that be something that will be available?
Well, what I can tell you is that the casks are licensed in 20-year increments. And the design is much more than 20 years, obviously.
Yeah.
So I can't say what a warranty is. It's not my area either, but the design is for much more, significantly longer than 20 years.
Well, let me just walk you through it, because sit on our side for a brief moment. Say Holtec's transfer, Entergy's gone, they clean it up, they close the deal, Entergy is back doing their core business elsewhere, and Holtec is here now, and say they do a bang-up job. They do a bang-up job, and in 8 years, the site is partially restored and usable for some things. But in 9 years, the casks begin to develop problems. They're licensed, but who's going to pick up the cost for that when one has to assume, since their budget is significantly more than what the known amount of money is, who picks up the money?
As the licensee, they would be responsible for ensuring they stay in a safe condition. I'll just reiterate that we will be inspecting the dry fuel storage facility at least annually, typically annually. Sometimes we go 2 years, but most of the time it's annually, so we're going to be monitoring the performance. Also, the NRC has programs that they're working on with the Electric Power Research Institute to do testing of the cask containers to ensure they're properly monitored into the future for any degradation. So it'll be part of our mission, of course, is to make sure they're maintained safely. It would be the licensee's responsibility to make sure they stay in a safe condition and take care of any costs associated with that. Of course, as I mentioned before, they will be able to go back and probably sue the Department of Energy if we don't have a place for the permanent repository for those casks.
Perhaps, but I'd rather deal with the reality of it, that it's an LLC, almost a special purpose LLC, created for this project. That LLC has no revenue coming into it, no income on an annualized basis. That LLC exhausts all of the funds by their own financial plan, and 9 years in, there's a problem.
Well, we will continue to review the spent fuel management plan.
Yeah.
And the fund associated with the decommissioning of that. So there will be money available to ensure that can be done too.
There is also a spent fuel cost estimate management for the spent fuel on site, which is separate.
Yep, I got it. I won't belabor it anymore. Any more questions? Senator?
Yeah, a couple of questions. First of all, and again, thank you. I know it's been a long week, and I was there last night in sympathy to the long week. But a couple of questions. You said that your primary function is to oversee the safety and to assure the safety. And yet in the presentation, you talk about checking out the financial qualifications. So clearly in your mind, in the NRC's mind, there's a connection between the financial qualifications and safety. Otherwise, you wouldn't be looking at that, correct?
Yeah. If I can interject, safety costs money.
Exactly.
Okay, so we want to make sure they have sufficient funds
To complete.
to make sure that they can maintain and decommission the plant safely and of course, to license termination, so to remove all the radioactivity.
Thanks. And so I'm going to try and ask the question, the same question I asked last night, but with more specificity.
Okay?
There are really good, qualified financial people, I'm not up to it, who are questioning whether the trust fund has enough money in it to do this. And so the specific question is, and it's related to what the chairman was asking, if there is not sufficient money in the fund, who actually ends up paying?
It would
Who
be.
is, let me rephrase that. Who's responsible to pay?
When the application is made for the license and the license is accepted, under the defense clause in our regulations, they are responsible, the licensee is responsible for ensuring that that radioactive material, including the fuel, remains safe while it's in their possession, okay? So it is going to be the licensee, and they will be responsible for ensuring the safety of that material, and we will be there to verify that they're maintaining it safely.
So if safety is related, and if what you just said is the case, and before you said that what this LLC is going to have is simply the assets related to this plant, because it's being specifically set up, this LLC, specifically set up to address the decommissioning of this plant, then why would it not be a better qualification to choose a licensee that actually has assets other than the ones that are simply related to the plant, especially if that financial strength is related to safety, since your job is to try to provide the safest alternative to the public?
Well, no, we're in there to ensure safety, not the safest. You know, we have to review the application that's been submitted. If a better qualified financial company or technically qualified, financially supported company came for us and wanted to do the decommissioning, we would be reviewing that application. But, you know, as we say, we have the one in front of us, and so that's the application we're reviewing. So we have to make a judgment on it, and if we think if the NRC finds it acceptable, we will
What if neither is acceptable?
Excuse me, neither?
What if neither is acceptable? What if you look at both of the PSDARs and you deem that neither has the financial strength in the case of?
Well, I can tell you that we've been doing annual review, every 2 years we've been doing reviews of the decommissioning funds. They're required to report those to us every couple of years when they're operating. And so we've had findings that they have reasonable assurance to complete the decommissioning based on the schedule and the completion dates that they've said they're going to do the decommissioning in. So that judgment, that decision's already been made, that they have sufficient funding to complete the decommissioning to license termination, radiological decommissioning to license termination. So we do that review every 2 years when the plants are operating, and then once they're in decommissioning, we do that review every year. So we are continually monitoring the expenditures and continually monitoring what funds are left over and the remaining work, and we require the licensee to report that to us.
Great, and I'd like to add that the NRC has authority to oversee the decommissioning cost fund, as to monitor that, to see, you know, part of it is submitting every year, but also to look at whether there's enough funds to complete decommissioning. That cost estimate needs to be updated annually. And if the NRC determines that there isn't enough funds to complete that decommissioning, then we have authority to tell them they need to add money to that fund, or they need to control their spending. So,
Add money from where?
from the trust.
From the trust fund.
So, I'm sorry, Dan, I had a follow-up question
Go
specific
ahead,
to
Jack,
that.
thanks.
So you're monitoring the spend-down rate annually
Mm-hmm.
of the
Yes.
trust fund?
That's
So
right.
if you get to the point, let's say everything's fine through the first 3 or 4 years, as we're in the middle, when the bulk of the building and demolition work type would be going on, and you find that there's a gap in the spend-down rate, how is that addressed?
What do you mean a gap?
Well, if you
So
say
if
we
you're
believe
doing,
there's
your
insufficient
spend-down
funds.
rate model shows that you're gonna run out of money before the end of that, say,
Right.
8-year time period, what actions are taken?
We could issue them an order to either add money to the fund or take actions to make sure that the funds remain available to complete the decommissioning on schedule, which means in general they may decide to slow down the work, or they may stop work for a little bit.
Which would cost more money, because you're
Yeah, I
gonna
don't-
extend
I
it over
can't-
that
I
time
can't-
period.
I don't know what their costs would be for demobilizing and
I'm just-
remobilizing. But I'm just saying that's the options. So we do have that authority to do that.
And that's, was through the decommissioning fund, planning rule, which was effective in 2012.
Let me just interrupt for a second. Two parts to the question. First is, if you could explain to us what happened in those cases where the companies actually went bankrupt, and you've dealt with this issue before, this wouldn't be the first time. But the second one, if you could just clarify, if you're instructing them to do one of two things, either control costs better, which seems to me to beg cutting corners, and I don't know the circumstance, but the second is, if they're drawing down from the decommissioning trust fund further to make up the difference, there is no income coming into this entity. There's one pool of money. Now, there might be some interest being earned on the principal remaining, but that interest is unlikely to keep up with any significant findings of something that nobody expected coming in. How do we reconcile, short of some sort of an surety bond? How do you do that when the entity doesn't have any assets?
Well, that's, issuing a bond would be one way, but they also have a parent company. They also are going to be obtaining funds back from the DOE for the spent fuel activities that have been completed. So it's up to them to make sure they can complete the project and terminate the license. So they have to have.
And remember, does not include restoration, so the requirements are for decommissioning, radiological decommissioning.
Well, the restoration is a relatively small portion. in
Right, but
comparison.
I understand your point in that.
You're chasing
yeah,
a
I
company
underst-
with no assets.
Yeah, but it is an LLC, but they also have a parent company that.
Well, that's very interesting,
And-
because we'd love to hear some of the additional details about what is the fiduciary responsibility between the parent company.
And I have that question with our attorneys right now, so.
Excellent. So you'll get it again in writing. And then beyond that, what is the amount of money that's being transferred, if any, between the seller and the buyer? Because there's been no disclosure, because one of the examples, and this isn't in your area, Bruce, particularly, but the town of Plymouth is very interested, for example, in receiving the land, the 1,500-plus acres, as a gift from Holtec. It's going to be a big topic of a lot of discussions, and has been already. That's an asset. That certainly will have some value. I don't know what it'll be, but it has some value. Who's buying it? I mean, do we get to see any of this financial data?
The NRC makes information available to the public. However, as far as financial information, some of it is proprietary, and that information the NRC has access to, but may not be, if it's proprietary, not available to the public.
I think we have to understand that we're not part of the sale.
Mhm.
We're only involved in the process because of the license transfer.
Got it.
And so, I agree that,
But there's gotta
as
be-
far as the 1,500 acres that the town wants, that's between the town and the licensee, whoever it may be in the future.
I absolutely understand, but you got to understand from a public perception point of view, this is a deal between two companies taking $1.05 billion as of October 31st of paid money that is also accrued interest with no bid, no transparency, nothing. And when you ask for something as simple as, how long's the warranty period on these casks? Now, that's proprietary.
I understand your dilemma.
All right. Senator, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just to take that a step further, in full disclosure, I'm a corporate guy myself, so I sort of understand this. I would like to know in the review, the financial review, both in the transaction, in the transfer of license, and then in the operation of the decommissioning, what the NRC considers to be a reasonable profit. Because this investment wouldn't be made by those setting up the joint venture or the new LLC unless there was a profit. That's the way this works.
Yeah.
And there has to be a reasonablement to that. And back to the chairman's comment, we have a right to know that. Whether or not you all think that it's okay to do this, I mean, you're accountable to the taxpayer. Whether or not you think that there's a need for transparency, there is a need for transparency for a lot of reasons. And one is the less expense that goes into the decommissioning, the higher the profit. There's a natural incentive to actually spend less and have a higher rate of return. So I'd like to know a couple of things. I think we have a right to know what the profit is, and I think we have a desire to believe that that is capped somehow, so that there is at least a reasonable cap on what the investors are going to make, both on the transaction in the transfer of license, and then in the business of decommissioning the plant. Because we're all worried about what if it costs too much. But there's also an issue of what if the profit's too high? That money, that excess money, should actually go back to the people who paid in, not to the investors in the LLC.
Right, and I understand your question very well. Unfortunately, the NRC does not regulate the commerce in the state. The state does that. So the Commonwealth of Massachusetts would be the ones who would be asking those type of questions, I would believe, of the sale. So we've had some interesting conversations the last few days with the governor and the Attorney General's office. So I think they're aware of the questions. They've said they're going to, I believe, intervene is the intent of what the statement was last night. So that's their prerogative. It's what their authority, within their authority to do so. So it's just not within the NRC's authority to do that.
I'm sorry. I'll go to Rich first.
Thank you. Echoing others,
Excuse me, before you can,
We're done.
I just wanted to add that John Lamb last night said that in his presentation that in the Federal Register notice for the license transfer, there will be information in that notice about obtaining proprietary information if you have a need.
The method of doing it. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Rich Rothstein, Plymouth. Echoing others, thank you for being here again tonight. I have two interrelated questions, a little different in emphasis than what I was asking last night. Dismantling a nuclear power plant under decon, certainly preferred, can inherently result in higher radiation levels to both workers, the surrounding public, and the environment, as opposed to the safe store approach, because as safe store, there could be 50 years of radioactive decay taking place before dismantling takes place. So my first question is, does the NRC have more stringent or slightly different regulations at this time for a decon approach versus a safe store approach? Secondly, a facility that is going to use the decon approach, I have a little bit of concern if radiation levels could be higher, as noted, in terms of when a licensee is going to probably file for an exemption to shrink the 10-mile emergency planning zone down to the site boundary area. And for that matter, I'd be a little concerned as far as just having it not shrink that far under a decon approach as opposed to a safe store approach.
Okay. Your first question, no, we don't have any different requirements for the regulation of the radiation protection programs as they relate to decon or safe store. We apply the same requirements that are in 10 CFR 20, but both, and that part of that regulation is the implementation of the ALERA principle, as low as reasonably achievable. We recognize that the plant is, the doses are higher when the plant first shuts down, and they decrease as the plant gets older. So we expect the licensee to take the ALERA steps to make sure the doses are minimized. Examples for that would be Maine Yankee, who did a chemical decontamination of the plant prior to doing the dismantling to remove a lot of the radioactive material and reduce the dose rates. But we haven't heard those detailed plans from Entergy or the future possible licensee on those detailed type plans. So no, there is no difference, but we expect them to practice the ALERA principle. We also expect that the doses will be managed, and the doses to the people, the workers, will be managed and such that they stay within the regulations. It's no different than a refueling outage right now. Once the plant first shuts down, the dose rates decrease over time, and they implement an ALERA program when they refuel the reactor and put it back together. Second part of your question, I thought, was about EP, emergency planning, and shrinking the, yeah. Right. Right now, we're required, or the licensee is required to request an exemption from any reductions in effectiveness of the radiological emergency plan. So what they've done in the past, and especially with the last 6 reactors that shut down prematurely, from Kewanee to San Onofre to Crystal River and Vermont Yankee, they request an exemption from those requirements. And that is based on the risk, and the risk is significantly reduced. I think don't quote me, I sometimes get them backwards, but I think it's 10 months for a boiling water reactor for typically the fuel to cool down to a point where you can no longer have a zirconium fire. You need that kind of energy to have an off-site release that would increase the doses at the site boundary within the to the EPA protective action guides. For a pressurized water, I think it's 16 months, if I recall properly. So after those points are met, the exemption generally is applied for and granted, and at that point they can reduce the emergency planning zone to the smaller area at the site boundary. Now, that does not mean they don't have an emergency plan. It's just that they don't have to implement the large off-site one. They still continue to have an emergency plan which will address the hazards at the site during the decommissioning and, of course, with the plant being shut down. So
I don't disagree that the potential for a serious radiological emergency would be lesser for a permanently shut down plant, and certainly after the spent nuclear fuel's been put in the pool and then eventually transferred to dry casks as opposed to an operating plant. But specifically, in terms of past precedents and precedents that are starting right now for those facilities undergoing decon, would you expect the shrinkage of the 10-mile EPZ to be comparable regardless of whether a licensee is implementing a decon approach versus a safe store approach, given the radiation levels could still be higher initially with the decon approach?
No, because what's going to happen is the radioactivity, the reactor system itself is in its own containment. It's in its own building. It's dismantled. It's packaged for shipment. Sometimes components go whole, but those rates are very much lower. But in most cases, they're segmented into parts, and then those are placed in containers, and the containers are
With controls,
with
right.
controls
Containment.
and yeah. So from that perspective, there's no real difference. If it's contaminated, it's going to go out as low-level waste, and there are controls. Some of the reactor internal components are very, very radioactive. They are handled underwater. They are loaded into shielded casks for transfer so they can meet the dose criteria to be on the highway and protect the public. So there's very many aspects that go into the decommissioning that are fairly, that's why it takes 7 to 10 years to do the decommissioning. They have to carefully dismantle the plant and its parts and manage those parts and package them for removal, hopefully from the site and disposal at an off-site waste facility.
And I'd like to add that you've mentioned the dose rates or the dose levels might go up, but the dose limits do not change, whether, as Bruce says, whether it's an operation or decon. For example, the public health and safety limits do not change.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why there's controls, the containment, shielding, radiological controls in place to make sure that they meet the safety requirements for workers and the public.
I.e., it sounds like there should be no concern then about limits being exceeded regardless of which approach is being employed.
Well, we will review their plans. Part of Ray Powell's organization is the inspection process. They will be looking at the programs as they're implemented to ensure that they're compliant. And I can't say that there won't be an overexposure, but I can't say that about anything. It happens frequently in the medical community. It happens across the country in different aspects. But principally, we're there to make sure. We expect that the licensee will maintain a rigorous radiation protection program, also a rigorous environmental monitoring program.
A LARA program.
Yeah, that's what I said, rad protection program that will keep the doses well within the safety limits that we've established in the regulations.
Thank you for your responses.
David, and then you, John.
Yeah, thank you for being here and kind of enduring the questioning. I think it's been very informative, so I appreciate your insight. Just kind of following up on the inspection process. So obviously you've got NRC inspectors on site now that are looking at the daily operations of the plant and ensuring it's run in a safe manner. When the plant stops producing power, do the inspectors go away? What's the frequency of inspection? How do you ensure that all of the careful activities you're talking about are actually taking place over the next 7 to 10 years as the plant's being decontaminated?
We have a dedicated inspection manual chapter to power reactor decommissioning. And in that document, it talks about the fact that we like to keep one of the resident inspectors at the site. Typically, we like to have them there for at least 6 months while all the plant is beginning its transition into decommissioning. Obviously, they're there for the defueling and continue to monitor the spent fuel pool activities to make sure the fuel is maintained in a safe condition. At that point, after the defueling, the inspection program will be transferred over from what we call the reactor oversight processes, which is the operational inspection program, and it'll be moved over to the decommissioning program, which Ray Powell's inspectors will be at the plant. They will be there frequently. They will be there when there's high-risk activities and major activities, not only during those activities, but some of the planning for them to make sure that we feel that they've done their proper due diligence to make sure that the work's going to go safely. So that frequency of those inspections will be based on those activities, and when we feel we need to be there, Ray will be assigning his folks to be there to perform those inspection activities. Obviously, in the beginning, we'll be there a lot. Once we can establish that they have a good work control program for doing the decommissioning and a good rad protection program and other issues, safety review process and others, that then it may slack off a little bit, but we'll be there frequently during the decommissioning process. It will also ramp up at the end when the licensee is doing surveys to confirm that they're meeting the criteria for the license termination. So that will go on at a higher rate also near the end. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, frequently is kind of a broad term.
Yeah,
I
let
can-
me-
Is it once a month? Is it once a week? Is it?
Typically, maybe once a week in the beginning. Obviously, we have the resident there. He'll be supplemented by the decommissioning inspectors that are getting familiar with the plant. It typically will slow down to quarterly based on the activities, and then it can ramp up at any time based on those activities that they plan to do. Keep in mind that the fuel inspection, when they begin to transfer the fuel, that will be heavily inspected to make sure that those fuel canisters are loaded properly and the procedures work well for those activities also.
Great, thank you.
Bruce, 15 plants are currently in safe store. Could you just speak to one of them? For example, which one has been in safe store the longest? Can you just give us a status of how much that plant was?
That's a good question. We have the two plants out at GE Valicitos. They're demonstration reactors. They've been in safe store for about 50 years.
50?
50, yeah. They were the prototypes for the boiling water reactor you have over at Pilgrim.
Okay, how about?
But more close to home here, I'll mention Millstone 1. Millstone 1 has been in safe store for, I want to say, about 20 years now. They still have fuel in the pool. It's within the security footprint of the other two operating units. And so we still inspect them generally annually, if not twice a year, but we do have resident inspectors that are there looking at the operating plants. So there's some pretty close oversight of that plant too. So, but
Do you have any out there in the 10-year range?
oh, gee,
3 Mile Island?
no, it's been there since '79, but the official closure date was like '93. So it's
So the one you said that had 20 people, 20 years, how many employees still on site? What do you have there?
I
Just
think it's
security?
about, security and a few managers. They still have some radiation protection people there to monitor the plant. They have generally some people that do the environmental work.
So what's the differential between what they have in their pod and what they need to, or they just?
I'm not understanding the
To
question.
decommission it. You said it's in safe store.
Yes.
So what are they waiting for?
In the case of Millstone, I think they're waiting for the other two plants to either shut down where they can decommission them in succession.
Okay.
Or we have, we have some other small plants that are been in in safe store because they're the only nuclear liability that the company has, and they're studying what to do about it. So and when to do the decommissioning.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Joseph?
I have a couple of questions, and I have them in writing, so I'm happy to submit them to the chair and to the NRC at the end of the meeting also. I want to thank Dave for getting my first question answered. Second question is, recently, we've gotten assurances from Entergy and Holtec on locating the new asphyxie to a higher location on the site and further back from the ocean. And they've assured us that it'll be safe and so forth and so on. And the process of moving the dry casks up to the current ones on the existing asphyxie and then new ones up to that higher location will be safe. Question is this, with such an action of building a new asphyxie in a whole different location and so forth, does the NRC typically review something like this to determine whether in fact both the location and or the movement of the dry cast to that location will be safe?
Well, let me address it this way. We have people that will be inspecting the new pad to make sure it's constructed to standards. They will also be looking at, I believe, the road that they're going to be using I think they're upgrading some road to meet the standards for the heavy weight. So we'll also be inspecting that. We have civil engineers that look at that particular type of construction, and dry fuel storage, and people that look at the overall compliance with the requirements in Part 72.
Two.
Yeah.
Part 72.
The reason for the question really is, it's one thing moving the dry cast to the pad on flat ground. It's another thing when you've got an incline and a new road to get up to that new location, and whatever safety aspects may be inherent with going up an elevation, and any sort of a road that has to be, access road that has to be built, both from a ability to be able to handle weight, as well as the ability to simply handle the incline and any turns and so forth and so on. So your indication that you have engineers who will review that?
Yes. I can speak from a little bit of experience, because in the 1990s, I was a rad protection manager at Calvert-Cliffs Nuclear Power Plant. We did some of the first spent fuel transfers into dry storage using the new homes facility, type facility. We had a long path from the plant, which was down at the bay level, to the hill up behind the plant. So it's a long, slow process, but it is done safely. That's what they chose to, where we chose to locate our dry fuel storage was on the hill kind of behind the plant there. I'll admit the hill here's a little bit steeper at parts than we had, but it still can be done safely.
Okay, I'm a little familiar with the Calvert-Cliffs
okay.
plant itself. Thank you. Next question is, will the new proposed NRC deregulations have any material impact on the Pilgrim facility? And if so, what will the impact be, and how might the decommissioning process be impacted? I realize that since those regulations are not final, you may not be able to answer this at this time. If you can't, how then will we be able to determine in the future, once they are finalized, or once you can discuss it, if there will be any significant impact from those changes on the decommissioning process that either entity or Holtec will have to undertake at that time?
Well, I can answer that a couple ways, but the first one is that the new decommissioning rulemaking that's in progress right now deal mainly with the transitioning of the plants from operation to decommissioning. So they address the amendments needed and the exemptions that are requested for moving the plant from an operational status into decommissioning. And so we're doing all that right now for the Pilgrim plant on the items that they have submitted to us to act on as far as license amendment and exemptions. Right now, the rulemaking is with our commission. They requested that we submit the proposed rules to them last May. We did that on schedule. As many of you know, we have a couple new commissioners, and so they have been working on the backlog of vote material that they have, decision-making. We expect that hopefully later this spring, they're going to vote on or start the review of our rulemaking, so we have an answer. I don't believe there'll be any real impact on Pilgrim because they can submit those requests in advance for the most part because they can be implemented when the conditions are met as outlined in the amendment. But the key ones, of course, are, in my mind, would be the reduction in the emergency planning zones. That would become a regulation as opposed to a exemption and requiring commission action. So that's the only one I can think that might impact the plant. I don't recall if that licensing exemption has been requested yet. But that's a typical one that the rulemaking will allow the transition to go with less resources from the licensee and from the NRC to make those changes since they're very routine. Okay?
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Last
Joe.
question. Some of the changes being contemplated that we've seen in the different documents, the regulatory basis document, the analysis document, and so forth, indicate that some of the exception requests that licensees have to make and do make rather routinely may be eliminated. At least those are being considered. The reasons given that such requests may be eliminated is because they're, at least from what I've read, they're unnecessary and would save both the licensee and NRC time and costs. If those proposed changes are finally adopted by the NRC, eliminating certain exception request submissions, what guarantees will the NRC offer that public safety, protecting the environment, adequate funding for decommissioning, and spent fuel storage will not be compromised by those changes?
Well, our primary source would be through the inspection program. So we would be validating through the inspection program, for example, the exemption that's currently issued for emergency planning reduction. They would have to keep the emergency plan in full activation until they reach that point where the fuel was cooled sufficiently to start reduction of the emergency plan down to the site boundary. So that's an example of that. We would do that through the inspection process. And also, we may conduct, the project managers may also provide some oversight in those areas also until we feel assured that these things are working properly.
Thank you.
Pine?
Yes, thank you. Hello?
Good to see you.
As I,
Can you move the microphone?
I'm sorry.
Want to make sure everybody can hear.
I brought up to you last night at the hearing, and I want to reiterate right now about my concern that really wraps the table around everything that is being expressed here in terms of not having enough money, in terms of delay, in terms of Pilgrim's, Entergy's PSDAR, and its lack of assessment relative to the current conditions of climate change and sea level rise. It is striking to me, as someone who has, I would say, come into this rather late, but going back into my files, certainly seeing lots of warnings in the 1980s about sea level rise, that the NRC doesn't address it in anything that I've seen written down. You mentioned last night the SEIS and the GEIS, and I went back to them today. I even brought my copy with me today, and those documents dealt with things like, and gratefully so, impact to species, to the intake, the effect of the discharge on the warming of the bay. And there was a lot of effort put into that. But absolutely nowhere am I seeing an inspection by the NRC on, and an evaluation of the NRC on what is changing at the site that could make all of these plans tumble down. One of the things that struck me so greatly after Fukushima was when Chairman McFarland came to Harvard and was talking, and her basic comment there was, "We never thought this could happen." But it did. And it blew everybody away, and we are dealing with it today. In fact, California deals with some of the radioactivity that is coming across the waters. I mean, they do inspections there for radioactive. So we don't want here in Plymouth, your confused look.
No, I'm concentrating on your question.
Okay, so it worries me that there is no acceptance of the fact, or no plan for how much might the water rise that would escalate our timetable, or make it more expensive, or make it impossible, or suggest that there should be barriers that we need to erect, or anything that recognizes that we have a challenge to address that has not been addressed before. And I hope that you will read Chapter 18, because it is frightening. And of the agencies, I didn't really count them, but there must have been 12 government agencies that were a part of that document. I didn't see the NRC there. I don't know why. I'll try and wrap it up more succinctly, But, you know, I did look at the PSDARs and their site characterizations and all that. Nothing deals with this issue.
Yeah, let me answer the, I guess from a high level, the NEPA process actually deals with the impact of the operation of the plant and the decommissioning of the plant today, and how it relates to the changes and impacts from those operations and activities to the site. So they do not address the longer-term issue of rising tides and water. So, you know, we're staying within the NEPA requirements in our environmental reviews, and that's where.
And-
Yeah, this is Bo Pham. He's
Good evening.
I'm sorry, Bo what?
Bo Pham is my name. And I just want to make sure we understand that despite, you know, what Bruce said is true, the EIS process is to document impact of the operating plant on the environment, not the environment on the plant itself. But having said that.
Brilliant.
Post-Fukushima, post-Fukushima, the NRC did issued a set of orders for licensees to comply with, and part of that process was for each, excuse me, licensee to take a look on a plant-specific level to see what the impact would be on the hazards that were predicted for each plant. Yeah, so the
Flooding.
Yes,
Was
including.
evaluated to be up to the door at Entergy. And we have a petition that's live still, God knows where in the NRC process it is, to address it, but that's for the operating plant. And I don't want to waste time on the operating plant because we know they're closing. What I want to waste time on is how you're going to address not the future long-term, but the sea level rise that is with us, that affects the groundwater on site, that will affect all of the site restoration activities that you are planning, and that will impact the bottom line, that these gentlemen over here that know way more about business than I do are concerned about.
I understand what you're saying, but I think that is, you know.
I want to know, I don't understand that you understand. I do not understand that the NRC understands the unique position that we are in here relative to sea level rise and the damage that can be done to this site without proactive, real concentrated effort. You don't have it. You're not putting it there. You're not evaluating it. And the regulations that you're relying on do not address it. That's the comment.
Thank you. I really can't address something the commission has not asked us to address, and so.
Well, I guess my question then is this: how do we get the commission to address it? We've been trying since 2015, and all I keep hearing is the commission might address it.
Well, I would, the only avenues you have is to write the commission and request that to put this into consideration. Okay.
John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. First, I want to echo my fellow panel member David Nichols' concern relative to that although this is a critical issue to Plymouth, it's also a critical issue to those of us who live in Cape Cod. So in terms of issues and concerns, and as we move forward, you will be hearing, I'm sure, from the Cape Downwinders and others, specific questions relative to the eventual closure, because we are within that 50-mile radius, obviously. But I want to get back to something that you indicated earlier, where you said to guarantee safety, you need to guarantee adequate funding. And I have been from the get-go very concerned about the amount of money that actually is in the decommissioning fund to support all of this. To the best of my knowledge, right now that fund has $1.05 billion. And that is supposed to basically take us through the process. But yet, when you look at what Entergy has suggested in the application that they have put forward, using, if you will, a safe storm model, they're indicating that they need $1.66 billion to make it all work. So somewhere between now and 2079, if in fact they were ultimately to be the entity doing this, they'd have to come up with another $0.61 billion. Where does that come from? And secondly, Holtec, if they go through the decon process, is suggesting that they need $1.13 billion. My math suggests that if Entergy is saying it costs 1.66, and Holtec is suggesting that it costs 1.13, and we only have 1.05 coming out of the gate, where does the money come from?
I really can't go into the numbers really with you at this time because we're doing a financial review. But obviously the whole, Entergy believes there's a lot of cost associated with the safe store period. That's part of it. Also, their estimates take into consideration some escalation factors, I'm sure, for future cost of money and the cost of decommissioning. Right now, I would say that the Holtec decommissioning estimate in their proposed PSDER can be based on costs that are better known at this time because we know what they are today. So we'll be taking a hard look at both PSDERs and the financial situation along with the estimates. I think the $1.05 billion is well in excess of the minimum amounts that the NRC considers acceptable for the decommissioning plan, but there's also a requirement that you provide us with a site-specific estimate and that we gauge that funding against that estimate to ensure that the decommissioning can be done, assurance is reasonable and it can be done safely and to license termination. Keep in mind, there are separate funds for the fuel management, and that's included, I believe, in the 1.05. It's not intended to include the restoration funds, but if you take a close look at both PSDRs, you'll see where some of that is addressed in the PSDRs by the applicants.
So there is more money available than the 1.05 in the decommissioning fund?
No, right now, I think it was September last year, it was 1.05.
October 31st.
Yeah, October 31st, it was 1.05 billion, excuse me.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you looking at that extremely closely because, simple math just once again suggests that if we only have 1.05 and Entergy doing a safe store is, doing a safe store is suggesting that by 2079 they need 1.66, and Holtec is suggesting they need 1.13. The numbers just don't work, at least the way I'm looking at them. And I'd also be concerned that as Holtec moves forward, you suggested that they have a parent company, that if more money would be needed, they'd go after the parent. Well, we all know that LLCs can create a situation with the parent company that the parent company has no liability. So I'm very concerned about the monetary support to truly make this happen and make this a process and an end product that we can all live with.
Yeah, I understand your concern. We're reviewing that as part of our process. I will say that my understanding is that, LLCs make it more difficult to get after the funds. It is still doable. That's what I'm told by off-the-cuff comments by some of our attorneys. So they're going to be looking at it very closely.
Thank you. Now, are there any other questions?
Yeah, just as a follow-up to that,
Let
then.
me just say for a second, we're running about 5 minutes late, and I know you've had a real marathon over the last couple of days. Can we extend your stay with us for about another 15 minutes longer than we expected?
I guess so. I'm
Well,
here.
I mean, you've been
No, I'm
great.
fine. Yeah.
Okay.
We're fine.
So we're going to continue the panel until exactly 8:15. Then we're going to go to public questions for half an hour.
I'll just ask a quick one so I don't get into Pat's time. Are there any other LLCs that are involved in decommissioning any plants right now? Or would this be the first approval?
We've had two that I know of for sure. I'm not sure about the North Star situation. It didn't seem to be an issue. But we have transferred the licenses to Zion Solutions, which is a subsidiary LLC of Energy Solutions, and La Crosse Solutions, which is a subsidiary or LLC of also of Energy Solutions. But there's a distinct difference there in that these were licenses were transferred for the purposes of decommissioning. It was not a sale. And so the land and the fuel were returned to the utility. In this case is Exelon for Zion and Dairyland Power for La Crosse. So you know, the purpose there was, of course, for them to take on the risk of the decommissioning, and it's what their expertise is. And so you know, that's their formation of their LLC to do that.
Another question? Pat?
Hi, my name is Pat Chiramo. I have a quick question. It's not going to take you a long time to answer. But in your slides there, you mentioned financial qualification and PSDAR reports. I was just wondering, does these reports include a specific cost estimate for each phase of the closing? And do you know, you've had other closing in the past, do you have like best practices on what the cost of the different phasing is? And do you compare them when you make your decisions?
The PSDR is a pretty high-level schedule, but it does include a fairly high-level site-specific cost estimate to meet that schedule. I will say that based on our experience, the decommissioning costs for various plants range widely, and it really is based on a lot of variance in how they're going to do the project and the status of the plant. I can tell you from experience that the 2 Zion plants will be completing the decommissioning here this coming year. They've been at it since about, I think, 2010 is when we transferred the license. So the actual decommissioning time was about 7 years. The plan's just land now. All the buildings are gone, and so their cost is going to be around $800 million for 2 large pressurized water reactors. We have costs that range from very high in California for meeting all the state requirements to around $600 million for a typical plant for the radiological decommissioning. So
And I can add to that, on our website, under frequently asked questions about reactor decommissioning, there's a question and answer, and one of them is, how much does it cost to decommission a nuclear power plant? And there's extensive information on that as far as costs from past reactor decommissioning. So I can give Sean the link.
Any other questions from the panel? No? Well, hearing none, you'll have one moment of entertainment, because now we'll show you how we do it. How many people would like to ask questions of the NSC? Raise your hand, please. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, if you could stand up just to make sure I get you right, because we've got the crowd here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Is that correct? 7? So we get 7, and we'll divide it evenly by 5 minutes. Each one will have 5 minutes. And since, Jim, you're the one standing, you can go first.
How did I guess?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually have sort of an introductory question here. I'm really here tonight in 2 capacities. One is as a representative of the town of Duxbury to express their concerns and give you an outline of what they are and why they are on some of the financial aspects of this transaction. That could not possibly be done in
Jim,
5
if you
minutes.
can use the microphone to make sure.
It's right here.
Yeah, you're not picking up on it.
That cannot possibly be done in 5 minutes. As David said, the towns need to be recognized. So my basic question to begin with is, when will this panel hear the concerns of the town of Duxbury?
Okay.
Because frankly, these short periods at the tail end are wholly ineffective and insufficient to do anything that approaches that.
Question duly noted, Jim.
Putting on my other hat, There were a number of things that were noted here tonight, and I think one of the critical things that one has to keep in mind, because the term has been thrown around with a great deal of sloppiness, is licensee. If you read the PSDAR and the license transfer application and the PSDAR that's connected to that, in other words, if you're having a heck of a lot of trouble sleeping, what will become very, very clear is the licensee is going to be Holtec Pilgrim. That's an LLC, and as people here have noted, its only assets will be the fund and some land that frankly Plymouth would like to get for free. That is the only financial assurance that Holtec says anybody has here, is the fact that the DTF, Decommissioning Trust Fund, will be enough. There are a lot of reasons that that is probably not so, but I don't have anywhere near time to get the town's position as to why that's the case tonight. Getting somewhat beyond that, there are another couple that seem to be misapprehensions. I heard said tonight that what is recovered from DOE will go into that licensee. I don't believe that's the case. That was not my reading of the agreement that was attached as part of the license transfer agreement. It looks to me like that recovered money will go back into Holtec's as, gee, it's more profit. And that profit could easily be, since $500 million is what they could take out, the licensee could take out to pay its costs, that could be a $500 million profit to Holtec that never goes into the DTF and is never available for any decommissioning at a later stage. Where does the rest of their profit come from? I was told by a Holtec representative at the prior meeting that they've built their profit into their cost estimates. Nobody's told me what that profit is. I've talked to a number of people, and I've been around 80 years now, and I think it's fair to assume that Holtec is a smart enough company that it would not get into this business unless it could see a profit of 30 or perhaps more %. That says that in this 1.1013 or whatever it is, their expectation is $300 million in profit, regardless of whether or not after they take their profit, there's enough money left to handle the decommissioning costs. The warranty period on the casks, they said it was proprietary information. We don't have much information, but we do have some, because we do know what the warranty basis was in California. It was 25 years for manufacturing defects only. That's it. And unless somebody at Holtec is willing to tell me differently, or is willing to tell this panel differently, I think you are perfectly free to assume that the warranty here is no better.
Jim, I just want to point out you got about 45 seconds, so if you want to ask a
Okay,
question.
one more thing, just on 45 seconds. I've heard a time schedule for this license transfer, and I have a question, I think, for Bruce. You heard last night that the Massachusetts Attorney General intends to intervene in this process, and I expect some others may intervene also. My recollection of the last time I was involved, my wife was involved in some intervention, is anything is accepted, it goes to the Atomic Safety Licensing Board. It goes there, and there is an extended process before the Atomic Safety Licensing Board. On the assumption that the Massachusetts Attorney General and others who intervene know what they're doing, how does that affect your time schedule?
Please.
Obviously, if there's the Attorney General intervenes from the state of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, excuse me, I live in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and we do the same thing. Obviously, if the AG decides to intervene on the process, that will probably delay the process whatever times it take to resolve the issue from the intervention. I don't know how long that would take. Some of these are resolved fairly quickly. I think that the state of Massachusetts obviously has a significant role in the whole process, so I would think that it would go through and but I don't make those decisions, but I think it would obviously possibly delay the process for the license transfer.
Who do we have over on this side? Henrietta, go ahead.
Good evening. I'm Henrietta Cosentino, and I want to follow up on comments by Jim and Pine, particularly. I am extremely concerned about the failure of the NRC to consider the impact of the environment on the nuclear plant site. And I haven't heard anything to reassure me that there will be any consideration of this. And if there isn't going to be a consideration of this, the fact that the sea is rising far faster than was anticipated in 2002 and 2007, far faster than was anticipated in 2012, far faster than was anticipated a year ago, then what the heck is going to happen? I have not heard. There are two projected plans, and neither one of them seems to hold water. Now, last night you heard many of us in the public express very severe concerns for our safety and for the success of the decommissioning. You heard about concerns with environmental impact, concerns with finances, concerns specifically with the nature of the dry casks and their siting, which is better than previously thought, but nevertheless lacking any kind of hard vaulted cover. So those are the three primary concerns that I heard voiced last night, and I'm sure that there were others, but those are the ones that really stay with me. And I really want to address Bruce and Amy with what I hope you won't consider an impertinent question. The question is, which concerns that you heard last night are going to be seriously considered? Which concerns do you think might actually make an impact on the NRC oversight or the energy plan or the Holtec plan? I'd like to know very seriously, what stays with you and what do you plan to take away from last night and tonight after all the concerns you've heard? I want to just append to this question the comment that last night in the parking lot, I did talk to Bruce and Amy, and I think I must have misunderstood something, because something that Amy said really dismayed me. Amy, it was the question of what concerns that we expressed. Did you hear? Did you understand our concerns? And Amy said, I heard your concerns, but I didn't understand the basis for them. Perhaps I misunderstood, but that's alarming.
Thank you very much, Henrietta.
Yeah, last night's meeting was of great interest to me. We've had a number of exchanges of emails with some of the local people here. We heard some of the same concerns in previous meetings also. You know, I hear loudly the concerns over the financial situation and the qualifications of Holtec and Holtec, but Pilgrim Holtec, Holtec Pilgrim, the LLC to have the license. So I obviously we have some follow-up work to do with both our attorneys and also with the financial people to ensure that our review of their PSD and license application are thorough. That's one major thing I'm taking back with me from the meetings last night. I know we did have a conversation in the parking lot yesterday evening. It was fairly brief, but at that point, I think both Amy and I were kind of overloaded on the past number of hours, so I hope we weren't rude but being brief is basically, we had to digest what we were hearing, and so there was no immediate response, I think, on either of us at that time. So we would apologize for that. But you know, the parking lot meetings are one thing. Trying to digest what we just heard in the public meeting and all the issues that were presented to us are another. So I took copious notes at the meeting. We also had other people taking notes on number of follow-up issues concerning that were presented to us. So I think the number one thing is, of course, the license review process we're following. We're going to make sure it's thorough. We want to try and answer all the questions that were received concerning the LLC and how that might function in the future. But again, you know, we are concerned about the environment. There is an ongoing environmental monitoring program at the site. It contains you know, significant effort to do that every year. Obviously, there's been added number of groundwater monitoring wells at the site to ensure that leaks are detected early. This requirement was put into place in 2012. And so we toured the plant today and looked at a number of the monitoring wells that are close into the plant. And so we're pretty much felt pretty good about the monitoring that's going on there, and hopefully that will limit the number of surprises that people want to know about that we may find, but that was the design of that program at that time. I also looked at the Met Towers, and they have two of them. One's they call it the 160, and one the 220, I think it is. I think the second one was probably put in after 3 Mile Island or something to increase the probabilities. The Met Towers will be in place as long as we have the requirements for the off-site dose calculations to be done. And that'll be done and continued all the way through to almost license termination when there's no more radiation to be released from the site. So yeah, we took the meeting last night very seriously. We were following up on some of the issues with the residents today, resident inspectors. We have a number of them we're going to be taking back. And just to be brief, I think that pretty sums it up, I think, for both Amy and I concerning the parking lot discussion last night. Like I said, we apologize if we seemed a little short, but we just spent a few rigorous hours responding to comments and trying to digest what the true meaning of them were. So,
Thank you. Mary?
The focus has been on finances, so I'm going to cede to my husband to continue. He knows what I will say, and he'll incorporate hopefully some of it. But it's going to be a tough one.
He better, right?
Bruce, this falls under the tag team rule.
that's why we use the lottery system.
Yeah.
But you permit people to pass their...
Yeah, but...
Okay. I'd like to pick up just 3 points, maybe 4, on what I see as the basic fundamental issues in this PSDR cost estimate. Number 1, just recognize at the beginning, if you look at the cash flow, the amount that's estimated to be left over at the end is 1/3 of 1% of the total. That is a remarkably slim margin on which anybody should hang their hat. So let's go to a couple of specifics. In coming up with these numbers, Holtec assumes that the fund will grow 2% over inflation. It also assumes that decommissioning costs will not grow faster than inflation. The only data points I've seen tell you that that is simply not true. The NRC's questions and answers on financial assurance tell you that decommissioning costs will rise much faster than inflation, and they give you a number over 20 years, 2.5 to 5.6 times, which works out to 5 to 9% a year increase in decommissioning costs. That's well above inflation. It's well above 2% more than inflation. Callan Associates every year holds a big conference, typically in Charlotte, North Carolina, for the industry, to say, okay, what in blazes costs are we dealing with? What do they tell you based on history decommissioning cost increases have been? Well, their most recent report said that between 2008 and 2016, they increased at a rate of 5.8%. Inflation during that period was less than 1.5%. So they're 4.5% above. You cannot assume that decommissioning costs are not going to go up, and they will swallow in the first week that 1/3 of 1%. Second, Holtec assumes that all the spent fuel is going to leave the site by 2063. That's when their PSDAR stops. I'm not going to take that one to the bank. Holtec says it takes $7 million a year to maintain the spent fuel. Let's suppose instead of the NRC's projected heaven knows how many hundred, it stays there only another 20 years. That's $150 million. Where's that going to come from? Who's going to take care of the cost if something goes wrong with the cask? I've seen estimates that say simply to repackage Entergy's casks would cost you more than $1 million per cask. Where is that going to come from? Then there are all kinds of costs the PSDR simply doesn't talk about. It's radiological, as we've heard. There's hazardous waste buried on that site. We all know that. And this idea that the site is clean, as expressed in the GEIS and the SEIS of most recent at the time of relicensing and the other several years before that, that cannot bound the environmental impact analysis. Nobody could rationally or frankly, responsibly make the assumption that everything is in that GIS and SEIS. It is not. They don't talk about tritium leaks. They don't talk about all the stuff that goes along with the tritium. They don't talk about the contamination caused when bad fuel, when Pilgrim opened, when it blew its filters, there were people wandering around in hazmat suits. They weren't looking for flowers. And finally, as you heard again tonight, none of these cleanup costs are included. Where is the money to pay for them, to make this site something that Plymouth and those of us who live in this region can actually use and enjoy? The way this is all set up, Holtec is going to make a lot of money. Entergy is going to get away scot-free. But unless the NRC can figure out a way to do something, we're going to be stuck holding a bag. And I really doubt that any person here, any person in Plymouth, any person in the EPZ, or any person in Massachusetts thinks that's remotely fair.
Thank you, Jim. Who on this side's next? Anybody over here? All right, we're back over to this side. Who's on this side? Yep, go ahead.
Hi, my name's David Agnew. I'm from Harwich. Under the rigorous oversight of the NRC, Pilgrim's operators have had 47 years to prepare for this next step, which could have come 7 years earlier. It appears pretty obvious that there's not going to be enough money in the pocketbook of the LLC to properly decommission Pilgrim. And my question is extremely simple. It's a yes or no question. Can anyone from the NRC guarantee me, point to a guarantee, that the Massachusetts taxpayers won't have to foot the bill?
Excuse me. Well, there are no guarantees, but I can tell you the process we would follow, and that would be, number one, the licensee would be responsible for providing that funding on any shortfalls for the decommissioning. The second step would be to rigorously pursue that through other means, such as the legal system, in concert with the Department of Justice to get those funds. That has been done by us in the past, but there is a process, but it does take time. I will not shy away from that issue. It does take time to get these things done. But the fundamental issue is that we will be monitoring the decommissioning funds each year, the expenditures. They're required to provide us a report. We will be doing a thorough review of those. We will, if there's identified any shortcomings, we will be issuing directions for them to either fulfill the required amount or slow down the work, as we've discussed already tonight. And if those fail, then there's other options the NRC can take as an entity to ensure that the decommissioning remains in a safe condition, and also pursue getting the funds to complete the decommissioning.
David?
Yeah, thank you. Can you tell when it happened that the NRC went through the Department of Justice to get the money?
The only thing I can give you is an example of an older facility that was in bankruptcy. The parent company was providing some money to fund the decommissioning at a reasonable rate, but yet we saw very little work getting done. And so we started to challenge them on what work was getting done for the money. And it ended up that we had an official investigation of the companies, and have presently involved with the Department of Justice to reconcile the situation, to obtain the necessary funding to complete the decommissioning.
Okay, David, thank you. Next. Yep.
Hi, good evening. My name's David Noyes. I'm a 29-year employee at Pilgrim, but speak tonight as a private citizen and a resident of Plymouth. I want to thank the NRC for taking the time last night at the public meeting and tonight's NDCAP to educate us on the federal regulations regarding decommissioning, and for providing additional insights based on their industry experience. The Code of Federal Regulation is clear that the licensee, whether it be Entergy or Holtec CDI, and the NRC are responsible to see Pilgrim through license termination. And I believe that all three organizations recognize this as a legal and a moral obligation. I know that the current staff at Pilgrim is committed to doing their part to achieve this goal. While existing regulations and standards have proven sufficient to accomplish this efficiently and with margins to safety 10 times across the country, many interveners in the process at Pilgrim are seeking to establish more stringent or ancillary requirements in many cases without established or scrutable bases. Some examples include a proposal for a final radiological source term standard less than half the federal standard with no public health benefit, calls for additional environmental or terrorism impact analysis where existing standards provide adequate protection, and continued emergency planning mandates beyond the time and distance where credible accident scenarios exist. The town of Plymouth has requested the donation of 1,200 plus acres of licensee-owned prime real estate that is a significant decommissioning trust fund asset. The problem with these wish lists is they are not always responsible uses for the trust fund. The fund is a finite resource that was established by the electricity ratepayers of the state of Massachusetts with the promise that it would be used to terminate Pilgrim's license safely and completely in accordance with federal regulation. This is not to say that conservative decisions should not be exercised in the process where conditions have changed or more insurance is warranted. Of course they should. But imposition of any additional requirement must meet the standard of having a sound technical and scientific basis in protection of the health and safety of the public before it is adopted by the licensee or mandated by the regulator. Potential interveners will likely express their wants, with or without cause, throughout this process. But ultimately, the licensee and the NRC must exercise responsibility and act as if the successful license termination depends on their prudency, because in reality it does. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
I'd like to respond to that, Sean.
No.
I'd like to respond to the comment and the example provided on radiological standards.
All right, go ahead.
So both the Beer Committee, Biological Effects of Ionizing Radiation, Beer 7, the International Committee on Radiation Protection standards are consistent and provide explicit scientific, peer-challenged evidence on the biological effects of radiation. And our desire to meet the Massachusetts standard of 10 millirem in a year and the EPA's requirement for water at 4 millirem per year is in fact science-based.
Thank you. One more question. We had one more, I think. Two more. All right. Okay, John, go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, John Gawley from Hingham. You hear that? I want to thank you guys. I've been watching you, and it's awesome watching you do this. Just to follow up last night, I got this report from 2014 or 2012 of that the steel used in the casts cracks from salt water exposure, and there's 6 explanations of that. I want to know if there's been any cracking since then. Have any reports of cracking since then? And what's the plan if there's no fuel pool, if something cracks? Good?
Okay, the information notice that was presented last night, I think it was 2012-02. 20, okay. I'm citing from memory. Basically, that info notice mentions that austenitic steels that are used in these casks, but they're used extensively throughout the nuclear power plant and in industry. They are susceptible to chloride stress corrosion cracking. In that information notice, it also says that this steels are used in the dry storage casks, and it's included in the notice as part of the people to be aware of that. We are also looking at the longevity of these casks, the NRC is. There's a program in place being piloted, has been piloted already, where there's working with the Electric Power Research Institute, where they're doing tests to validate the condition of the casks and to validate the ability to detect any cracks in that type of material with the casks. I find it kind of interesting that because we put a notice out about people to be aware of it, and that it's almost like it's been fed through the internet that they're susceptible to cracks, which means look for it. We expect licensees to have in place programs to do that, to anywhere that there are cracks and through-wall cracks in these casks in the country. And that's not the case. All the casks are intact. We are in the process of the program to evaluate the rate of any degradation of those casks. The design life is much more than the original 20 years that they were intended to be used. Secondly, the spent fuel pools are gone at the end of decommissioning, and all the fuel is in dry storage. The fundamental issue is that we don't need water to keep the fuel safe. They could be safely kept in air. They are in air when they're in a cask. The big things are contained inside the container. So the primary method that would be used is to overpack any cask that would have degradation. That would be the first step in isolating any possible degradation or possible cracks. That's the general plan for the industry. You don't need a spent fuel pool to do that. And so that's the process that the cask people, manufacturers such as Holtec and New Homes and other ones are in the process of developing those programs so they can be issued certificates of compliance by the NRC. I'm sure those applications will be made in the future. So, fundamentally, the casks are safe. There is a program that's being put into place to monitor those casks for degradation of the steel containers. And then lastly, there are plans being put together to make sure that the cask can maintain their integrity should there be an issue with cask integrity in the future.
Do you have any other follow-up question?
Nope, just that it says that they've done that within 16 to 25 years, that cracks have been exposed. So.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead. So I understand what you're saying, and I think the information notice gave that as an example of what could happen to austenitic stainless steel, not necessarily that an instance of that had happened with a cask.
Really? That's not how I read it.
I'm positive that that's what it says.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, when asked earlier what we took away from the meeting, I was concerned enough about my memory after you asked your question that before I went to bed last night, I promptly got the information notice, and the examples cited in the information notice are all for piping, not for casks. So you're correct, there are examples of the cracking, but it occurred in piping systems which are markedly different than the environments the casks
So it's
function in.
not the dry cast itself.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. You guys
No,
rock.
thank you. Diane? This is the last one, so we'll be on time.
And again, thank you all for your wonderful service. I just want to remind everyone, last night when a question was asked, how many reactors has Holtec decommissioned? And the answer was none. But I have a question for Mr. Watson. Was the decommissioning trust fund set up to pay taxes?
As far as I know, the decommissioning funds are supposed to cover the cost of the decommissioning, which would include taxes and the cost of, that's a cost for decommissioning. I can get that back to our,
Okay. So it's interesting that the decommissioning trust fund will pay for taxes, but it won't pay for emergency planning. Just a little note there.
well, I would comment that the emergency plan changes over time. There's still an emergency plan. The emergency plan
But it's
is
only right
consistent-
on site, though, and.
But
yeah.
it's still an emergency plan. It's consistent with,
Well, let's be clear then, because we are here as the public to say that we still want public safety to be the priority and protection of the environment to be the priority. And I share Pine's frustration with the lack of really assessing the issues that could impact what's happening during decommissioning. And I will speak to the terrorist threat. I don't know if any of you saw that Frontline documentary, that Frontline program documentary, Documenting Hate, where two domestic terrorists were apprehended on their way to Turkey Point with guns and bombs. And so we're going to have a spent fuel pad that's going to have 47 years with 61 casks of highly radioactive waste. We need to have an EIS done on the impact of even one cask being destroyed by a terrorist attack and the impact that has on the environment and in the public safety. That's going to be off-site for sure. So that needs to be done. Also, too, this is part of the low incidence, high consequence criteria that you used when the reactor was operating for the reactor, so it should also be issued to the spent fuel. And I think, too, if there is an emergency plan, that it should stay in place. And I know in Oyster Creek, citizens are fighting for that. At Santa Ana, citizens are fighting that. And actually, across the country, at all decommissioning reactors, the citizens and the public are fighting for their public health and safety because of the waste that will remain. And so Plymouth is a nuclear waste dump, and it needs to really address that issue seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you. So that concludes both the question and answer period as well. And before I request a motion to adjourn, and thank you for your consideration, staying a little longer, I think I'm speaking on behalf of all the folks you visited with and spent time with. We really do appreciate you being here. The extraordinary amount of information for all of us. We will be following up with written questions that hopefully will be easier to manage the responses to. And just on behalf of everybody here and everybody from the governor all the way through, thank you very much for coming and spending so much time. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much.